a Heroes Welcome podcast. Good morning, everyone. Maria?
Good morning. Thank you for joining us on the Heroes Welcome podcast. I am Maria Laquerre-Diego, licensed marriage and family therapist, registered play therapist supervisor, and I am joined by my co-host, Liliana.
That's a lot of initials. We're just going to go with Liliana this morning. Hello, everyone. And we're so excited to have Bruno today here. So Maria and I are really good friends with Val. And Maria, what else do you want to add about it?
Well, I think just a precursor warning of like, buckle in. It's going to be a super fun conversation. Val, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for offering and having me. I feel honored, and it feels so delightful and tingly to know that we're friends. I'm like, yay, we are friends. That's great.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners?
Of course. Yes. Thank you for the prompt. I am an RPTS as well. I work in Colorado. I work primarily with kids and families, and I have a small agency where I am honored and delighted to work with amazing clinicians supporting the community specifically with families who are neurodivergent and all of the things that encompasses. We try to travel around to less populated parts of the state and reach out to rural communities and give them mental health support as well. Yeah, that's what we do.
Amazing.
I was like,
I know. That's a brief. Like, I like to teach too. We have interns. We have amazing students who are learning how to be incredible clinicians, and I'm a supervisor for them. I like to teach people about care, compassion, neurodivergence, inclusivity, being kind. I wasn't ready. I'll get better.
Well, and I have the absolute pleasure of having you as a supervisor faculty for my play academy. So you're doing good work, not just in your state, but you tend to just come with this aura of like helping people in the helping field. You're a helper for the helpers.
Yes.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The other thing that Val is not mentioning, because she likes to hide all these parts about her, and my job is to highlight it like crazy, is that she's actually an expert witness for Colorado Springs. Do you want to tell us a little bit more?
That's true. I do that. Sometimes I forget, right? When you all sent me the Heroes Welcome, it made me think of like my military time, which I don't talk a lot about because there's a lot of hero association with military veterans. And for the first part of decade worth of work I did with children and family in this county specifically, but surrounding counties, was to be able to testify and talk to the legal profession, judges, guardian ad litems about kids' process and work. So that means that I get to go and speak legalese and translate kids' play to folks who are supposed to advocate and be aware of what kids need in the legal system. So they might have been, removed from their homes for child abuse, neglect, dependency, neglect kinds of things. So the 4th Judicial District has, I don't know if it's ordained, that's not the right word, but an expert witness in child abuse, neglect, attachment, childhood development, and unfortunately, sexual abuse and high conflict divorce. So I work a lot with families in big struggles in the legal system too.
And thank you for doing that work.
Yeah.
That is not work that all of us can do or choose to do. So thank you, because it's so necessary.
Yeah. I agree.
Thank you for naming that. I want everyone to know, because we got to witness some of your work as you were preparing for some of your work, and we're like, how did you regulate? How do you do self-care? Because what you get to witness and contain and translate, um, it's so hard, especially in our field. There's so many biases in regards to not only what we do, but how we advocate and translate what we witness with our clients. So it's beautiful work, and honestly, it's an honor for you, not only for me, for us to know you, but for us to know what you do for everyone that you work with. So thank you.
Thanks for saying that, because apparently I present it well, because it's very ugly. And it's when I started doing work specifically with high trauma and kind of compulsory care with kids, it's not something that's very glamorous. It is really high conflict, and it's interactive and kind of intertwined with all of the different systems that are set up in our community to support and keep kids safe. And they all come at it from a different perspective. So we've got law enforcement, sheriff's office, CSPD, different community law enforcement agencies who are directly interacting through forensic interviews or through responding to emergency calls, and what not only mental health and mental health support, but then children, interacting with them, doing interrogations and investigations around that. Then to the other side of the legal, which is the like guardian ad litem, which is a person who represents a kiddo in the legal world and has their best interest and essentially their what's called privilege. So if the parents aren't prioritizing the kiddos, what's in the best interest of the kiddo, the judge or the court will appoint a legal person who says, yeah, I'm going to prioritize that. Or a child legal representative is another name that it's called. And theirs is a legal background. They don't have most of the time, they don't have uh, the education or the training in the community mental health or working in that developmental stage for children. Even with adults, they're like, this looks like a high conflict divorce, and I'm a lawyer, and we have a side, and that's my training. And then for judges, well, that's kind of a trifecta, but the Department of Human Services in each county also interacts, and these are caseworkers who are trained in a model of triage and kind of emergency, like come in and figure out what's going on and where can I put out fires and what kind of services and the immediate needs of a family or a child, hopefully, but systemically, what the needs are. And they're not trained in mental health or even in developmental stages and what a kid needs, then top on what a kid who's presenting as neurodivergent, which is trauma, which is ADHD, which is autism, which is sensory processing overload. Like, why is this kid doing circles on the floor, spinning around? And I'm just not just, but I'm a caseworker just trying to get this kiddo out of here, and he's losing his mind. And then to the legal system overarching that says, okay, here's what I've taken from all of these experts, and how do we best meet the kids' needs after a time of COVID where we're all online, and is it in the best interest of this kid to engage in mental health support online? Or is it best interest of this kid to be removed from their home? Or is it best interest of this kid to have supervised or unsupervised visitation with this parent who is allegedly, doing all of these different things?
Yeah.
their education and wherewithal around what does this kid need? No, we can't bring them to court and have them testify, but who can speak for them? And I'm feeling like the Lorax. I speak for the trees. Um, but it's a lot about understanding the different processes. I was a police officer in the Air Force, so I have some awareness around that, but I'm not a lawyer. And I've had to get really um, educated on a lot of things, but that's not my passion. Like, I don't want to know the laws.
Yeah.
I just want to be able to talk about kids and what they need and recognizing that we talked about boxes a little bit earlier. Like, we can't shove these kids into a box of like, okay, they're a kid, they need this, and this is what's going to fix them. It's systemic and it's so much bigger than that. And monologued.
No, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
It's having to learn different languages, different worlds almost, because they don't converge often. And when they do, there's not a lot of overlap in terms of education and understanding. So I think that's why positions like yours are so important. Because you've taken the time to learn the legalese, to speak the language, and educate, right? The people making these big decisions, so that they have all the information.
Yeah.
So it's that beautiful dual attention of being able to be inner field and mental health and being able to have a foot out on the legal and then being a bridge in order to integrate them. So I love what you're saying. So let's go if it's okay with you. So then what can we do? What is it that we as therapists and anyone who's listening, but what can we do when there's all these implicit biases? Because we're thinking from our lens. This is what I know. This is my role. I love that you were talking about all those different roles that everyone has. But in that infrastructure, then we have this misunderstanding and mistreatment, and a lot of the times marginalization of this population. What is it that you can tell us that we need to know, or how can help? How can we make those implicit biases explicit?
Mm-hmm. Like, the first part that comes to mind is understanding that, like, I know that neurodiversity is gaining some traction and we're hearing it more, especially in the mental health community, but also in our social media community. And like, oh, I'm self-diagnosing now. And there's an understanding that I perceive a lot of people miss that neurodivergence is pathologized. So neurodivergence, if we're explaining to anyone, is just a different brain way. And it's not pathological, and it's more common than probably typical. And it's based also on societal standards. So if we're thinking community, my awareness of neurodivergence in my community is going to differ than what it might be with Maria in New Mexico. There's even in rural Colorado, neurodivergence is different and is approached differently. So that's the first piece of, like, it's just a different way of experiencing the world. And it can be as simple or as not complex as how we feel our clothes, how we, respond to bright lights or noises. It's also very directly tied, because we are mental health professionals, with how our brains respond to stressful situations. So if a kiddo is coming in and they want to come in and we're seeing them in our community, it's still a stressful situation because they're still in a new situation. So they might present divergent from what a typical kid who knows you or who's been to 100 different therapists, that's an exaggeration, then it would be if a kiddo is being taken or removed from their home, right? That's stressful. And if there is necessities happen, like if they need to be taken from that environment, there's trauma, there's attachment trauma there. which is going to present in a divergent way for that kid. So their behaviors are going to present divergent from a typical, I've had the majority of my needs met. I have healthy attachments. I have recovery when I have attachment ruptures. Those kids are going to present in a way that we ourselves, culturally, individually, believe is typical. What can I expect? And we've got the education of what a typical development looks like. So when we understand that and we go into a situation or have a kiddo come to us in a situation, the assumptions that we make about what we know about their story, whether it's cultural, whether it's developmental. I'm assuming that you can or can't sit still in a room. You probably can't solve this complex problem because you're presenting like you're drooling and meowing like a cat. So you're probably not very smart. These are thought distortions, assumptions that are made in the community when a student is in school. That's another piece I didn't touch on earlier, but the systemic, the organizational structures, when they're in school, if they're flighty and wifty and looking out into the world and really struggling to come back, there can be pathologizing. Oh, he doesn't pay attention. He's not a good kid. Oh, well, and these are a big one too, this punitive piece that we have culturally, socially, of like, well, if we just put him in a corner or isolate him or send him down to the principal, because if he can't keep himself busy and keep his hands to himself, then he needs that structure. He needs, spare the rod, spoil the child kind of mentality. That comes in a lot of different directions for our kids. It's school, it's intergenerational. Like, how does my grandma think that the kid is supposed to act? Because I live with my grandma, and so those awarenesses around it's not bad. We're not villainizing how our abuelita does with her kids. And we're making awareness around like there might be a parent or a caregiver who's trying something different and seeing the differences of their kids and not pathologizing it.
I love that. I also, and this is not an answer that you necessarily have and can, but if you had your magic wand, you were talking about developmental, like normal developmental like milestones. It brought me back to like my kids and going to the pediatrician, right? You had to fill out like the little developmental bubbles and where they were, and then they would tell you if they were, on track or behind. Are those outdated?
Ugh, let's talk about it. The pediatricians are making me crazy right now. I'm like, can we stop pathologizing and telling our kids that they're fat? Can we stop telling them that they're like, there's nothing wrong with them? And like, what are you kidding? Not that there's wrong things, but like, can you spend a moment with these children and understand their family dynamics to understand, like, we have a feeding disorder. We're pathologizing, we're diagnosing with, okay, so this kid is in the second percentile. Oh, well, you must be a neglectful parent because you're not feeding them. Well, good luck. Please let me bring my child to you and you can feed them because it doesn't matter what I offer them. And there's not a relational aspect in pediatrics and a lot of pediatrics in the medical field. It's like, okay, well, let's get it in. And gosh, I think it's the Westler. I might be mislabeling this. The whatever the ADD assessment is that they have you fill out at your doctor's office.
Yeah.
It's like a 10 question questionnaire. And I've got these 10-year-olds coming in and like, well, I filled this out at my pediatrician's office. And so they said he has ADHD. We're going to go ahead and put him on Adderall, Ritalin, like this SNRI. And I'm like, that was it. That's all they needed was you told him he was staring out a window and now he's on a stimulant and he can't control his anxiety and he's biting people in his class and we can't figure out why. And but
yeah, I mean, we know that a lot of these standard measures are based on, upper middle class white developmentally children based in the US culture more often than not.
From the early 1900s, like, or even late 1970s? Are you kidding me?
The world has changed just a little bit
Oh.
since then. And I don't see that reflected in these forms. Like they have not been updated to include like what life today looks like for these kids.
Right. And there's also a mentality of if I bring my kid in, there's a sense, I don't know, maybe this is my personal perspective, but this sense of like, I don't know what I don't know. And I'm coming into my doctor, or I'm relying on a teacher, or I'm, coming to this other professional who's the professional, who's like the expert, like Chucho, and they're telling me antiquated things like, let's do cry, what is it, where they let your baby cry and
Right
just
now.
sleep training.
Yeah.
And I'm like, have you done any work on attachment and like what a human offspring needs the first couple of years of life? Like, no, 4 months old, let them cry until they stop. And I'm like, no, do not listen to your doctor. Trust is broken.
Yeah.
And then the idea of these disordered thoughts around food and feeding will like only offer them one thing. And if they don't eat it, they just don't get to eat, and they'll eat when they're hungry. But
Right.
also he's at 2%, and you're going to try to charge me with neglect if he doesn't gain weight. But here's some Pediasure pumped full of sugar and red dye. Okay, this is fine. We're going to go ahead and feed him Belvita crackers. And this is what I'm like, it's not holistic. It's not inclusive of cultural, like, I don't feed my kids that stuff because I can't tolerate it, but gluten's fine, dairy's fine. I'm like, where are we in the world of medicine and training and also being dismissed with biases of like if there is holistic interest, that it must be some witchcraft, right? Oh, you're just hysterical woman. You don't like what we're talking about, so you must like, oh, you want to try acupuncture? Okay. Well, yeah, I want to try anything for my kids where they can be the best version of themselves and not worried about being labeled as obese or bad and derelict. And
I think that's hard for us in our profession because we are in some aspects looped under medical, right? And then in other aspects, we are not given the same privileges that medical gets in terms of our field. And I think that that's where a big disconnect is, right? We are relational. We know that that is where the change happens. That is where growth and healing can happen. And medical care is not as individualized, right? I mean, speaking from my own experience, right? I have my own clients. They come in for their scheduled appointment. They expect to be seen at their scheduled appointment time. How many times have I gone to the doctor and have had to wait over an hour past my appointment time, over 2 hours past my appointment time, and just expected to deal with it, right? And then be rushed in and rushed out less than 7 minutes. Right? If we were to do that, could you imagine the backlash?
No, and then let's not also forget the opposite, well, the end part of that where we're billing for insurance and justifying what we're doing every step of the way. And oh, by the way, as a mental health professional with over 13 years in the field and hundreds of hours and certifications in neurodiversity, including autism, I can't diagnose a child with autism. Even though I'm certified in all of the assessments and all of the measures. But the doctor who gave you a piece of paper, a single piece of paper, is going to say, oh, that's what that is. And I'm going to give you a class, whatever drug that could potentially change your neurobiology. But I can't. And I'm not that I would, but I'm held to a standard of like, have you tried calcium and like a supplement? Are you using essential oils? Oh, she's a hippie. Hold on. I'm like, but you have like, can we talk about physiology and the importance of movement and
Well, the
yeah.
acknowledgement that what works for you
Exactly.
is what we're looking for.
Yeah. Because I think now we're moving to what are we doing in order to promote an inclusive practice? Not just because when we go with doctors, they are prescribing because they are instructed, everything is fixed with the pill, right? That's their model. We are relational beings and we understand in our field that because of that we're seeking that, so we're like, well, how are you doing in relational with not only your food intake, your sleep, what practices that you hold. You mentioned even culture, right? I'm very aware that as a Latina there's a lot of stigmas in regards to how do we treat things, such as like the throat. For everyone who's listening, my throat sounds different today, and that's because I've been sick. And we were talking about, have you drinking tea and honey, and it was like, first of all, I've been doing that and also been doing Vicks all week, just for all my Latinas listening there, in my feet, in my chest, in my back. Know that I'm doing the normal stuff, but in the inclusive practices, we're going beyond because we know that there's more than. It's not one way. I love how that you're talking about, can I get to understand the individual in front of me and their family system so that I don't miss. And doctors, first of all, they don't have time for that because corporate is giving you 10, 20 minutes and get out. How can you see more people and invest less time in them in order to reduce costs? Which is the same thing that we're dealing when we're talking about systems, when working with Medicaid insurances. And you name it, Val, like how do we justify everything that we do? And we're trying to do more than that because of all the certifications that we're getting, all the investments and all those trainings that we're doing, because we know that there's more, that everyone is an individual, that no individual, even if they come from the same family, will have the same needs. So I
Right.
love everything that you're saying. And thank you for naming Chucho. For all of you who are listening, my dog is very attached to me. And when he knows this week that I'm not good, he like literally just wants to be sitting next to me. So he joined this like really quick. And Val, who has been to my house, has interact with Chucho already, so she knows already how needy he is. She loves him, and I said needy, but right now he's just sitting with me, trying to help me feel better.
I
So
perceive he is a projection of what you need. Thing. He is attuned
yes.
and he is knowing that you need some comfort. And he's like, I got you, mom.
So I'm thinking as we are getting to the end of this episode, what else will be the last, not the last, because I'm hoping that you will come back and talk more. But when we're talking about promoting inclusive practices, besides, um, what else will you want to say to everyone who's listening to us today?
I feel compelled also to put a little asterisk in I'm not dogging on doctors. I
Yeah.
think there are structural flaws in every helping, like teachers don't have the resources, other folks in different areas. I don't know where a person finds it in themselves to see a human being as a human being. Like maybe that's my next thesis thought, but the idea that we get into play therapy as clinicians because these humans don't have a voice. They don't have an interpreter for what they're not yet developed to be able to tell the world. And their parents are doing, their caregivers are doing the best that they know how to do. That's the assumption. And if we as clinicians can like help people to turn on this is a little human doing the best they know how to do, and they're different and they're quirky and they might be loud and they might be quiet and they might be messy and be covered in boogers and they might be very clean and tidy. That's another pathology we can, like, why are you so clean, child? um but like for all of the big people out there in all of the different professions, recognizing that these little people are looking for connection just like we are, and they don't have the tools and the development, like the what's the word when it finesse to say, hey, guess what? Really in need of connection today. And I don't know if it's human connection or dog connection, but I'm feeling really detached. Like they're little people. They just throw a fit. And I it's not pathology. It's not something that, is deserving of criticism and shame for these little humans. Um, they need attachment like us.
Yeah.
Was that philosophical? Was that too deep?
I was like, I'm voting for you. That's what's
Those are broad.
No, I loved it. I loved it. How do we keep this going? How do we keep raising awareness and kind of calling it out so that change can happen?
Hmm. I'm gonna harness my inner Dick Schwartz, if for those of you who are aware of internal family systems and the kind of uh, modality of like be curious, stay curious with all people. How do we keep this going? Continuing to advocate, continuing to speak in spaces where maybe you have been marginalized. And I mean, in the circuit here in the Springs, I'm a man hater. So it like if you speak against something and it's a predominantly male legal system,
Yeah.
you can get labeled as such. And
That's what
being
they do.
curious about those people. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what they do, right? They label, they like to have things in nice, organized, labeled boxes. And that's just not our experience with life in general.
No, no. And be curious about the parts of like why do we need to have kids be big? And why do we need to have a label for why that kid is upside down and squeezing the life out of himself with his arms? And why is she, plugging her ears and like losing her mind silently? Just curiosity. What part of her needs connection? And yeah,
So the invitation to be curious to see what is the need, not to focus on the behavior.
yeah. And
Yeah,
not to imply that we have what they need,
Yeah.
right? Because I wish I could fix it. I wish I could save them all. But that might be we might be the only person in a grown-up's life who's like curious about what they need, or a kid's life who's like, huh, I can't fix it, but it's an interesting need that you have there, and they're seen, they're accepted as they are.
yeah. Curious is so kind when you explain it that way.
And seeing them, right? The invitation in your last statement is such an attachment statement.
I know. I'm really like leaning towards an attachment orientation.
Yeah.
My interns were giving me a hard time. They're like, you don't really have an orientation, like a theoretical. And I'm like, no, I kind of pull but I do.
You do.
I'm very connected with attachment and meaning of that. So,
I was like, Val, I know you since what, 2015, 16? You have always been my attachment person in those groups.
Attachment
but go
symptoms.
back to like the theories when you were in grad school and they're, like you've got a humanistic or a person-centered or Jungian, and I'm like,
It's another box. It's another box
yeah,
that we reject, Val. You don't
I know.
have to be in a box of a purist.
Yeah, no.
Right? That was, and Dr. Barbara Frankel, should you ever hear this, I apologize, but I am not a purist. You tried your best
Yeah.
in grad school, right? But she was like, you can never call yourself an eclectic theorist. And I was like, oh, I
I
can't.
know. Right?
We will.
Mission accepted. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I think because you do, I mean, you've been speaking about systems and systems theory, right? And this can be a whole separate meeting, but those theories are also old theories based on a time that is not relevant anymore. The world is not the same as it was when those theories were developed. We've come
Right.
a long way.
It goes
Yeah.
back to the, what can we do to be more inclusive? What are the adaptations that we can do as we're studying those models, even with attachment? Even when attachment focusing on secure attachment, not all cultures can provide that. Yet there are aspects that we can bring, such as Val, you were mentioning being seen, being understood, being curious, being important in that moment, being worthy of, which are all universal attachment needs. So Val, thank you for being here today and talking not only about your expertise, but making us aware of the needs of this population and how we can advocate for them. That's what I took from here, which is what would I do to get one more training, and then two, to continue advocating for this population in a different way. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
So much. Yeah, this has been really, really fun. I think my initial takeaway is we just have to stay curious, and curious can be so kind. Where and avoid pathologizing in boxes that way.
Yeah, it's good.
I love it.
Thank you for seeing me.
Yeah, anytime. And I know we'll have you back a couple of times because we just have so much to unpack with you.
Yes, we do. So for our listeners, what we will do is we will include Val's information when we post the podcast. So stay tuned. And again, Val, thank you for being here. And we cannot wait for you to come back and tell us more.
Thanks, friends.
Until next time.
Bye, guys.